Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Flux, and we are in the second lecture for the Sex and Relationships module of this class in general psychology. In our last lecture, we explored the complexities of attraction, how biology, culture, and personal experience shape who we're drawn to. But attraction is just one part of human sexuality. Today, we're shifting our focus to sexual behavior, a broad and deeply personal aspect of the human experience that includes everything from desire and expression to identity and communication. Before we dive in, let's check in with a couple review questions from the last lecture. Which of the following is generally not considered to be part of attraction? A. Biological factors, B. Cultural norms, C. Seasonal patterns, or D. Personal experiences? The answer here is C. Seasonal patterns. While seasonal patterns may affect mating behaviors in some species, they are not a primary factor in human attraction. Let's do another one. Parental investment theory is based on the idea that A. Reproductive costs are unequal between the sexes, B. Men invest more in parenting than women, C. Parenting children takes financial investment, or D. Grandparents are more invested than parents in the success of children. If you chose A, you're spot on. Parental investment theory argues that because pregnancy and child-rearing are more costly for females, they tend to be more selective than males in mate choice. In contrast, males who have lower biological costs may prioritize different reproductive strategies. So what's ahead for today? In this lecture, we'll break down sexual behavior into 5 key areas. We'll first approach the domains of sexual behavior. What does sexual behavior include? We'll take a look at orientation and identity, how we define sexual orientation and whether it's fixed or fluid. We'll take a look at the broad spectrum of sexual behaviors, from kink to monogamy, and how different people engage in sexual expression. We'll take a look at consent and communication, discussing why clarity is essential for healthy sexual relationships. And we'll finish discussing the future of sex, approaching how technology is shifting and shaping the way that humans engage with intimacy. Then we'll conclude with some summary and review. By the end of this lecture, you'll have a deeper understanding of how human sexual behavior is shaped by biology, psychology, culture, individual experience, and technology. So let's begin. Sexual behavior is often thought of in terms of physical actions, but it can encompass a much broader spectrum of the human experience. Sexuality is not just about what people do, it's also about their desires, expressions, and identity. But we generally start with a person's actions. Sexual behavior can include a wide range of physical activities that people engage in alone or with others. These actions vary across individuals and cultures and are influenced by biological, psychological, and social factors. Sexual actions can be shaped by personal values, relationships, and cultural expectations. Not all sexual behaviors involve physical intimacy. Some focus on emotional connection or psychological stimulation. And some people engage in frequent sexual activity while others experience little to no sexual desire. But sexual actions are just one part of this picture. Desire plays a key role as well. Desires refer to what people find sexually or romantically appealing. This can include attraction to particular traits, can include sexual orientation, which describes who someone is drawn to, and it can include sexual fantasies, which may not always translate into real-world behaviors. It's important to note that not all desires lead to action. Someone may fantasize about something but never act on it. Additionally, sexual desire is not static. It can change over time and based on a person's experience and relationships. How people express their desire brings us to the next domain, expression. Sexuality is not just about what people do or want, it's also about how they present and express themselves. These expressions can include flirting, body language, or verbal communication about attraction. It can include fashion, style, or aesthetic choices that align with sexual identity. Engaging in subcultures or communities that celebrate specific sexual identities or behaviors also falls into this domain. Sexual expression is shaped by cultural norms, personal comfort level, and social contexts. Some people are open about their sexuality, while others prefer to keep it private. Finally, sexual identity is about how someone understands and labels their own sexuality. It can include sexual orientation, like heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, but it can also include gender identity, which may influence both sexual attraction and behavior. It can also include personal and social labels that reflect how someone sees themselves. Sexual identity can be fixed or fluid. Some people identify consistently over time, while others experience shifts in how they understand their sexuality. It can also be shaped by culture and language. Different societies have different ways of categorizing and discussing sexual identity. So let's explore some of the different ways that people identify with their own sexuality. Sexual orientation and identity are a core way that many people in our culture identify with their sexuality. But they're not just about behaviors. They also shape how people understand themselves and their relationships. Sexual orientation refers to a person's enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, and/or sexual attraction. It describes who a person is drawn to in terms of physical attraction, emotional and romantic connections, and sexual behavior and preferences. Common orientations that we use in our culture include heterosexual, which is attraction to the opposite sex, homosexual, attraction to the same sex, bisexual, attraction to both sexes, asexual, having little to no sexual attraction to others, and pansexual, attraction to people regardless of gender. Sexual orientation is often seen as fairly stable, but some individuals experience shifts in attraction over time. This flexibility challenges categorical models like the labels we've just listed. This has led researchers to explore more dynamic, spectrum-based approaches. Historically, at least in the United States, sexual orientation was categorized into fixed groups, but modern research suggests it may be better explained as a spectrum. Categorical models define sexual orientation as these clear-cut groups, like gay, straight, or bisexual. Dimensional models view attraction as existing along multiple spectrums, where people may experience different types of attraction to different degrees. These models account for the complexity by including different dimensions. It includes sexual attraction, whether two people are sexually compatible, romantic attraction, related more to emotional bonds, aesthetic attraction, whether a person finds someone visually appealing, behavioral expressions, including how someone actually engages behaviorally, and identity, how someone labels their sexuality. One of the first researchers to challenge categorical thinking when it comes to sexual identity came from Kinsey's research. Alfred Kinsey revolutionized the study of sexual orientation in the 1940s and 50s. He was a biologist and sex researcher who conducted large-scale surveys of sexual behavior. His studies found that many people's experiences don't fit neatly into heterosexual or homosexual categories. As a result, he developed a scale, which came to be known as the Kinsey scale. He ranked sexual behavior from 0 to 6, where 0 represented exclusive heterosexuality, and 6 represented exclusive homosexuality, with intermediate numbers reflecting degrees of bisexuality. While the Kinsey scale was groundbreaking, it focused only on behavior and didn't account for identity, attraction, or romantic feelings. More recent models, like this split attraction model, build on Kinsey's exploration of dimensional aspects of attraction and sexual behavior. The split attraction model distinguishes between different forms of attraction, such as sexual attraction, romantic attraction, and aesthetic attraction. One example of this is Langdon Parks's purple-red scale of attraction, which expands on Kinsey's ideas by incorporating even more dimensions. This model helps explain experiences like asexual individuals who feel romantic but not sexual attraction, or people whose romantic and sexual orientations don't always align. This allows for more precise explanations of attraction and behavior in the sexual domain. With this framework, let's take a look at your understanding with another attention check. Dimensional models of sexual orientation, A, include categories like heterosexual and homosexual, B, explore attraction across one or several spectrums, C, do not consider romantic and non-romantic attraction, or D, cannot explain same-sex attraction. If you chose B, you're correct. Dimensional models recognize that attraction is complex and exists on multiple levels. Now let's explore the complex and intertwined relationships between sex, gender, and biological variation when it comes to identity and behavior. Sex and gender can sometimes be used interchangeably, but in research and many other cultural frameworks, they do represent two different aspects of identity. Sex is generally used to refer to biological variation, including chromosomal sex, XX or XY, the gonads, like the ovaries and testes, hormones, including estrogen and testosterone, and reproductive anatomy. Gender, on the other hand, often refers to social and personal identity, and includes social roles and expectations, behaviors and expressions associated with masculinity or femininity, and individual identity and self-perception. This model creates a firm biological foundation for sex, but there can be more variation there than we typically account for. Sexual development may typically result in a bimodal distribution statistically, with two peaks that we often label as male and female. But there is natural variation in chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy. This can lead to biological expressions which fall outside of these two distributions. Chromosomal variation, or chromosomal aneuploidy, is when sex chromosomes don't appear in the typical XX or XY pattern. This can occur in several different ways. There's Turner syndrome, which is having a single X chromosome, and it results in a person with typical female genitals, but they're often infertile, lacking menstrual periods, and have some physical differences such as a shorter stature and sometimes heart defects. Klinefelter syndrome, or XXY, is a syndrome that results in a person developing a penis, but they may have smaller testes, lower testosterone levels, as well as enlarged breast tissue, reduced body hair, and they're often infertile due to low sperm production. XYY syndrome results in similar development to XY males, but can result in the person being taller than average, some delayed motor development, and a higher possibility of learning disabilities. Trisomy X is a condition that's often undetected, as most individuals with trisomy X syndrome develop along a typical female track, though this can result in taller than average height, lower muscle tone, and an increased risk of learning disabilities. There also can be hormonal variations. For example, androgen insensitivity syndrome is a syndrome that occurs in individuals who are genetically male, in that they have XY chromosomes, but their body is partially or completely resistant to androgens like testosterone. This results in the development of typical female genitalia or ambiguous genitalia. Mild cases may lead to the development of male genitalia along with breasts and reduced body hair. Then there's congenital adrenal hyperplasia. This condition results in overproduction of androgens like testosterone. In XX individuals, this often results in ambiguous genitalia, irregular menstruation, and increased body hair. XY individuals typically develop male genitalia, but they can go through puberty early. This condition impacts cortisol production and requires hormone replacement therapy throughout the lifespan. 5-alpha reductase deficiency is a condition that results in a deficiency in dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. It occurs in genetically male XY individuals and results in ambiguous or more female genitalia with undescended testes. Fertility is often impaired. These chromosomal and hormonal differences, as well as some other factors, can result in genitalia that don't neatly conform to typical male or female presentations. This is referred to as intersex conditions, and it includes people with differences in reproductive anatomy that don't fit into the standard male or female buckets. These variations highlight the complexity of biological sex and challenge simplistic biological binary models. In addition to the different chromosomal, hormonal, and anatomical presentations of sex, gender has also been explored outside of that binary. Many cultures recognize more than two genders. For example, many indigenous North Americans conceptualize more than two genders in an identity that is collectively referred to as two-spirit. Hindu societies have recognized hijras as a third gender for centuries. Some Indonesian societies, such as the Bugis people, recognize 5 distinct gender roles, and Mahu is a recognized third gender in native Hawaiian culture. Western cultures have conceptualized expansive gender identity through pathology, as with gender dysphoria, defined as when a person's physical body does not align with the gender that they identify with. Modern approaches have begun to look at non-binary and transgender identifications as non-pathological, and they recognize that health benefits come from celebrating gender-expansive identities. However, this acceptance varies dramatically across societies. Many researchers have explored the underlying biology that may be connected to sexual orientation and gender identity. This research is summarized by C.E. Roselli in their 2018 paper, The Neurobiology of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. Research suggests that both sexual orientation and gender identity are shaped by biological and developmental factors. In terms of sexual orientation, genetics explains about 40% of the variance in men and about 20% in women, indicating that our sexual preferences are impacted by many different factors in addition to genetics. Neuroanatomy research has identified that a particular nucleus in the hypothalamus, the INAH3 nucleus, is smaller in homosexual men and women than it is in heterosexual men. In addition, the fraternal birth order, or FBO effect, has repeatedly found that having older brothers increases the likelihood of male homosexuality, and this is possibly due to the maternal immune response after carrying multiple male children. In terms of gender identity, we have fewer genetic studies that have explored this, but there are several gene variants that have been associated with expansive gender expression. Hormonal variation, including elevated androgen exposure, may play some role in trans identities, but these findings have been somewhat inconclusive. Neuroimaging studies have found some support for different brain structures that may play a role in gender identity, but again, these findings are quite complex and require further study. Overall, research supports a biological basis for both gender identity and sexual orientation, though it is complex and still not fully understood. Next, let's switch gears and talk about the spectrum of sexual behaviors that can be found across the diverse human experience. Sexual behavior exists on a wide spectrum, encompassing a broad range of desires, actions, relationship structures, and expressions. Sexual behavior is not limited to reproduction or traditional intimacy. It includes diverse forms of erotic expression, role-playing, and power dynamics. Some behaviors are common across cultures, while others are less understood and more stigmatized. A key distinction in studying sexual behavior is between non-disordered behavioral variations and paraphilic disorders. Not all sexual behaviors that fall outside of societal norms are disordered or harmful. Researchers differentiate between non-disordered variations of sexuality and paraphilic disorders that cause harm or distress. Non-disordered behavioral variations can include behaviors that fall outside mainstream sexual norms but are practiced safely and consensually. This can include kink, which is a bit of a catch-all for sexual behaviors that involve power, role-play, and intense sensory experience. BDSM, or bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism, which includes engaging in structured role-play with strong power dynamics. Fetishes involve attraction to specific non-genital body parts or objects, and role-play includes acting out erotic scenarios for heightened intimacy. These behaviors are considered healthy when they are consensual and do not cause distress and enhance well-being. But unlike kink, paraphilic disorders involve distress, impairment, and non-consensual behavior. These key distinctions include behaviors that cause significant psychological distress or social impairment, and behaviors that violate consent, such as voyeurism, exhibitionism, or coercion. While kink and BDSM are often misunderstood, research suggests that they are not linked to psychopathology when practiced ethically. Modern psychological understandings of kink have been explored by Williams and Sprott in their 2022 paper, Current Biopsychosocial Science on Understanding Kink. Recent research challenges the historical stigmas surrounding kink and highlights its complexity as a biopsychosocial phenomenon. Kink is defined as an umbrella term for non-traditional sexual interests and behaviors that often include exploring power dynamics, playing with extreme sensation, like pain, sensory deprivation, and temperature, engaging with shame-based roleplay and arousal, like taboo roleplay, shifting consciousness in erotic situations, like subspace or topspace, highlighting arousal from non-genital body parts or inanimate objects, as is the case in fetishes. Studies suggest that about 45 to 60% of adults report having fantasies related to kink or BDSM, and about 20 to 50% of adults surveyed have engaged in some form of kink behavior. Key findings from this paper are that kink practices are linked to sensation-seeking and altered states of consciousness. Additionally, there's no consistent evidence relating kink to childhood trauma or mental illness. In fact, some research suggests that kink practitioners may have higher emotional well-being, but stigma remains a significant barrier. Many kink-involved individuals don't disclose their interests due to fear or judgment. Sexual behavior is also shaped by relationship structures, which vary widely across cultures and by personal preference. Monogamy is a relationship model in which two partners remain sexually and romantically exclusive. It's common in many cultures due to historical, religious, and social influences. Polyamory, on the other hand, describes a practice of maintaining multiple consensual romantic relationships. It requires clear communication and ethical agreements between partners. Research suggests that polyamorous relationships can be just as stable as monogamous ones when built on trust and communication. Open relationships and consensual non-monogamy include relationship structures where partners engage in sexual or romantic connections outside of their primary relationship with consent. Some forms include swinging, engaging in recreational sex with others while maintaining a primary partnership or marriage, and relationship anarchy, rejecting hierarchical relationship structures altogether and forming different systems. Overall, anthropological and cultural evidence suggests that human relationship structures are incredibly flexible. Relationship norms are cultural constructs. Some societies historically embraced polygamy, group parenting, or fluid relationship structures. Research suggests that early humans likely existed in a wide variety of relationship conformations. Success depends on communication, boundaries, and individual compatibility. Next, let's take a look at how consent and communication shape healthy sexual interactions. Sexual behavior is not just about desire and attraction. It also requires clear communication and mutual agreement between all parties involved. At the core of this is consent. which ensures that sexual interactions are safe, respectful, and free from coercion. So what is consent? Consent is clear, enthusiastic, and ongoing agreement to engage in sexual activity. It must be freely given. It cannot be coerced, manipulated, or obtained under pressure. It must be reversible. Consent can be withdrawn at any time, regardless of past agreements. It must be informed. All parties must understand what they're consenting to. It should be enthusiastic. A yes should be active and willing, not reluctant or forced. And it should be specific. Saying yes to one activity does not mean agreeing to everything. Consent is not implied by previous interactions, relationship status, or silence. It requires continuous communication before and during any sexual activity. Different communities and contexts use different consent frameworks to guide interaction. These include clear affirmative consent, which is the standard in many legal and educational settings. It requires a clear yes rather than the absence of a no. It encourages active, verbal confirmation before and during sexual activity. The safe, sane, and consensual, or SSC framework, is widely used in the kink and BDSM communities. It ensures that erotic behaviors are safe in that risks are minimized as much as possible, they're sane in that activities are engaged in with full mental clarity, and they're consensual in that all parties freely agree to this interaction. Risk-aware consensual kink, or RAC, is an alternative to SSC that acknowledges that some sexual activity does carry risk. It encourages open discussion about potential risks and the need for informed consent. It also focuses on personal responsibility and mutual awareness of boundaries. Each of these models emphasizes the importance of explicit consent and communication, regardless of the type of sexual or erotic interaction. Healthy sexual relationships depend on open and honest communication. People have different desires, boundaries, and comfort levels, so navigating these differences requires clear dialogue. It takes openness when discussing desires and boundaries, freely sharing what feels good, what doesn't, and what expectations exist. It facilitates clearly navigating differences in desire. Partners may have different levels of interest or comfort, which should be approached with mutual respect. Misunderstandings are best approached with compassion. If confusion arises, it's important to clarify intentions without shame or pressure. Good communication fosters trust, connection, and mutual satisfaction, all of which are essential for healthy sexual relationships. Let's do another attention check. Which of the following best describes consent? A. Once given, consent cannot be withdrawn. B. Consent is implied if you're in a long-term relationship. C. Consent is an enthusiastic, informed, and ongoing agreement that can be withdrawn at any time. Or D. Silence or lack of resistance implies consent. The correct answer is C. Consent is a continuous process, and it must be given freely without coercion. Sex and relationships have always evolved alongside technology as culture shifts. In our modern era, artificial intelligence, robotics, and digital media are reshaping intimacy in ways that we've never seen before. But as these technologies develop, they bring both opportunity and risk. Will they enhance human connection or harm it? Let's dive into a binary we aren't usually thinking about when it comes to sex: ones and zeros. The rise of large language models, or LLM-based AI companions, has created a new kind of intimacy, one that exists entirely in the digital realm. AI chatbots like Replica and Character AI allow users to engage in simulated romantic or sexual relationships. These AI partners can offer emotional support, acting as a safe space for users to share their thoughts and feelings. They also can provide sexual or romantic roleplay experiences that are tailored to individual preferences. At their best, they encourage exploration and self-discovery, particularly for people who struggle with in-person relationships. But exploring these new virtual relationships comes with new limitations and concerns. These patterns may reinforce isolation. Some fear that AI companionship could lead people to withdraw from real-life human connections. They can come with ethical concerns as well. AI companionship is often commercialized, with companies profiting from emotional dependence. There's also concern around the nature of emotional depth that is being communicated by current AI chatbots. These AIs don't generate responses in the same way that humans do, and that process difference matters. As AI companionship advances, these ethical discussions become increasingly important. But beyond chatbots, robotics technology is advancing, and some predict that humanoid sex robots will become increasingly more common in the next decade. We already have a few modern examples. RealDoll X is already available as a highly advanced AI-enhanced robotic partner designed for companionship and intimacy. Many other companies are working on advanced humanoid robotics. Engineers are developing lifelike robots with responsive movement, AI-driven speech, and facial recognition, which could be used to foster intimacy and in sexual encounters. The possibility of robotic sexual and romantic companions does have some potential benefits. They could be used in therapeutic applications, with some experts arguing that sex robots could be used in therapy to help people with trauma or social anxiety. They also increase accessibility for individuals with disabilities. People who face physical or social barriers to relationships may find companionship and sexual expression through robotics, but they also come with many ethical concerns. These robots could drive unrealistic expectations and objectification. Could widespread use of sex robots lead to distorted views on human intimacy? Additionally, being able to program a human-like robot to do whatever we desire can blur consent boundaries. If people become accustomed to interacting with robots that cannot refuse, how might that affect their expectations in relationships with humans? As sex robots become more sophisticated, society will need to grapple with their social and psychological impacts. One of the most troubling developments in digital intimacy is the rise of deepfake pornography, AI-generated, realistic videos of people who never actually participated in the sexual content that's being displayed. Deepfake software is becoming more sophisticated and easier to use. Non-consensual deepfake porn is often weaponized, targeting celebrities, influencers, and even private individuals with the trend of deepfake revenge porn. There are many legal and ethical implications to rapid technological development. Deepfake technology is outpacing legal frameworks. Many countries lack laws that have been able to catch up to the implications of deepfake exploitation. Deepfake pornography also violates privacy and autonomy, stripping people of control over their own image. Broadly, this could contribute to the erosion of trust and authenticity in society. As deepfakes become more convincing, it becomes harder to distinguish real from fake, undermining trust in digital media. This could also create dangerous social consequences, from blackmail and harassment to political disinformation. The challenge ahead is finding ways to regulate and combat harmful AI-generated content while preserving freedom of expression and technological innovation. As technology continues to reshape intimacy, we must balance innovation with ethical considerations. Relationships are evolving. The lines between virtual and real intimacy are becoming blurred. This must be approached with intention and awareness as we tread into new territory. It brings new opportunities for connection. AI and robotics may offer new ways to explore identity, intimacy, and companionship. But it also should strengthen our resolve for creating ethical safeguards. Without careful consideration, these innovations could lead to exploitation, isolation, or harm. We must work to develop systems that are intentional and help to facilitate nurturing connections. Let's take a moment to reflect. As we look to the future of sex and relationships, consider this. Do you think AI and technology will enhance or harm human intimacy? What are the potential benefits of virtual relationships? What are the risks? How can we ensure that consent and ethics are prioritized as technology continues to evolve? We've explored a vast and complex topic today: how sexual behavior, identity, consent, and technology shape human intimacy. Now let's review some of the key ideas from this lecture. We covered categorical versus dimensional views on sexual orientation. Traditional models have placed people into fixed categories, whereas modern research suggests that sexual orientation exists on a spectrum, with variations in attraction, identity, and behavior. We attempted to tease apart the complexities of sex, gender, and identity, finding that both sex and gender demonstrate more variability than we typically assume. We dove into the broad spectrum of sex and sex-adjacent behaviors. Sexual expression takes many forms, from traditional intimacy to kink, BDSM, and diverse relationship structures. And we talked about how paraphilic disorders differ from non-disordered variations based on consent, distress, and impairment, particularly in the domains of well-being and psychological impact. We outlined frameworks of consent and the need for clear communication when engaging with others sexually. Consent must be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Different communities use different consent models. but all of them are focused on clear communication. We ended by exploring the future of sex. AI companionship and sex robots present new opportunities for intimacy, but also raise ethical concerns. Deepfake pornography violates consent and erodes trust, posing serious legal and ethical challenges. As technology evolves, we must balance innovation with ethical safeguards to ensure respectful and fulfilling relationships. Before we close, let's do a bit of review. Which of the following statements is most accurate? A. Sexual orientation and gender identity are the same thing. B. Gender identity determines who you are attracted to. C. Gender identity and sexual orientation are independent but may influence each other. D. Sexual orientation is fixed from birth and cannot change. If you chose C, you've got it. While gender identity and sexual orientation can interact, they are not the same thing. Someone's identity does not necessarily determine their attractions. Let's do another one. Which of the following best describes the ethical concerns surrounding AI-generated deepfakes? A. They improve virtual relationships but reduce authenticity. B. They violate consent by creating non-consensual sexual content. C. They are a harmless form of entertainment. Or D. They only impact celebrities and public figures. The correct answer here is B. Deepfake pornography is an ethical violation that exploits individuals without their consent, raising serious legal and privacy concerns. As we wrap up, think about how sexual behavior and related identities are deeply personal, complex, and even flexible. As we continue to navigate changing social norms and technological advancements, approaching these topics with openness, curiosity, empathy, and critical thinking is essential. Attraction, relationships, and sexual expression are not one size fits all. They exist on spectrums shaped by biology, culture, and personal experience. By embracing open communication, consent, and ethical engagement, we can create a world that respects and celebrates human sexuality in all its forms, while also prioritizing safety and respect. Thanks for joining me on this exploration of human sexuality. Remember to stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. I'll see you in the next lecture.